sometime in the liminal space between the twilight of 1983 and the dawn of 1984, a rumor began to circulate. A ghost of a melody haunting the most obsessive circles of Bob Dylan's faithful. Dylan had just released his 22nd studio album, Infidels, to a reception that was appreciative, if not quite rapturous. While few were heralding it as a return to the seismic genius of his mid-60 seconds peak, a palpable sense of relief rippled through his audience. This was a clear and decisive return to secular music, a significant ascent from the trilogy of fervent, evangelical gospel albums that had left many of his longtime followers bewildered. Certain tracks, particularly the sinuous, prophetic Jokerman, shimmered with the old magic, proving that the cryptic, visionary poet who had fundamentally rewired American music 2 decades prior was still in there. But this new rumor, this persistent and tantalizing whisper, spoke of something far greater. It told of a song left behind, an artifact abandoned on the cutting room floor that represented a monumental leap even beyond the album's most celebrated moments. This was a song, the story went, that might just ascend to the rarefied air of Dylan's much mythologized imperial period. It was the missing link, the irrefutable proof that his capacity for brilliant, world-weary insight and virtuosic songcraft had not been diminished by time or faith. Before long, these whispers would find their validation in the hiss and crackle of illicit vinyl. Asterisk. Infidels' times had barely cooled from the pressing plant when its first bootlegs began to bleed into the underground marketplace. By this point, Dylan was no stranger to this clandestine world. A sophisticated community of bootleggers already orbited his work, a shadow industry complete with its own labels, distribution networks, and dedicated clientele. In fact, it was a Dylan Leak 1969's legendary times, Great White Wonder times, that had inadvertently kicked off the entire golden age of music bootlegging. In those days, the modern pop industry was still a gangly adolescent, its legal arm yet to evolve into the many-headed hydra of corporate litigation it is today. Labels possessed fewer resources to hunt down these phantoms, allowing the bootlegs themselves to become objects of mainstream fascination. When Time's Great White Wonder times surfaced, independent radio DJs spun its raw, unheard tracks during prime time, and the thriving rock press lunged at the story. A 1,969 piece in Time's Rolling Stone Times magazine chronicled the bootleggers' cloak and dagger methods, painting a romantic picture of borrowed cars used to ferry records across town, and clients given no address or contact point, only a time and a place. Dylan's label, Columbia Records, chased these ghosts in vain, launching the first sorties in a guerrilla war that would one day engulf the entire industry. Eventually, many of the rustic, otherworldly recordings that comprised Time's Great White Wonder times would see an official, celebrated release as Time's The Basement Tapes asterisk. All of this is to say, it was hardly a surprise when the Times Infidels Times outtakes found their way into the world in the mid-80 seconds. And as they did, Dylan fans across the globe became intimately familiar with an unreleased masterpiece titled Blind Willie McTell. The creative process is an inherently messy, unpredictable affair, Songs morph and reshape themselves like living things, and bootlegs offer a strange, ephemeral snapshot of this evolution, freezing a moment in time and imbuing it with a transient, almost sacred quality. Sometimes, a bootleg reveals a song only in fractured snippets or lo-fi demos. Other times, it presents a song in multiple, contradictory forms across various takes, with no definitive version ever seeing the light of day. And sometimes, these contraband tracks eventually earn their official release, cementing a single recording in the public consciousness as the proper one, the final word. Blind Willie McTell received its first official welcome in 1991, unearthed alongside a treasure trove of other illicitly circulated recordings when Columbia Records issued a box set titled Times the Bootleg Series Volumes 1, 3 *. This enormous, revelatory collection was the first in an ongoing archival series that continues to this day, plundering Dylan's vaults for outtakes, live performances, and unreleased gems. And while those first 3 volumes are laden with jewels, none stand out with the stark, haunting power of Blind Willie McTell. The version included on Times, the bootleg series Times, is a sparse, skeletal masterpiece. The arrangement is elemental, featuring only Dylan's resonant, weary vocals and a haunting, church-like piano, all interwoven with the delicate, crystalline tracery of Mark Knopfler's 12-string acoustic guitar. Dylan sings in a mournful dirge, a funeral march for a nation's soul. The lyrics opening on an ambiguous verse heavy with the weight of religious symbolism. This take was recorded on the final day of the Times Infidels Times sessions and has become, for many fans like myself, the canonical version. But in recent years, 2 more official releases have offered profound insight into the song's difficult birth. These earlier takes were recorded on the very first day of the Times Infidels Times sessions, revealing that Dylan wrestled with this epic for nearly an entire month before ultimately, and inexplicably, excising it from the album. Take 1, officially released in 2021 by Third Man Records, bears a much stronger resemblance to the slick, full band production of Times Infidels *. It's built on an airy organ, a thumping, almost jaunty country bass line, and searing, blues rock interjections from guitarist Mick Taylor. Dylan's vocal approach here is a world away from the final version, a kind of cynical, almost sneering delivery, the voice of a jaded prophet surveying a fallen world. Well, I heard that hoot owls singing as they were taking down the tent. Take 5, released on Times, the Bootleg Series, Volume 16, *, feels like a midway point, a bridge between the 2 extremes. The full electric band is still present, but the arrangement is sparer, the mix pushing Dylan's piano to the forefront. His vocals here are tinged with a raw desperation, swelling from a weary murmur to a powerful, righteous shout by the song's end. And I know no one can sing the blues like Blind Willie McTell. Even with these alternate histories now available, there remains a powerful temptation to declare that final, acoustic take as the definitive one. After all, it was recorded last and released first. But that would be a gross oversimplification, a misunderstanding of the very tradition from which the song springs. Dylan's work, like all great folk art, exists in a constant state of flux, changing over the years and taking on new life with each recording and every live performance. This modern tendency to think of songs as singular, static objects, butterflies, pinned under glass, is a product of the recording industry. For most of human history, songs were fluid organisms, passed from musician to musician, evolving with the times and the culture, colliding with one another, remixed and remade year after year like stories told around a fire. Blind Willie McTell is a direct and glorious result of this very process. While the lyrics are pure, unadulterated Dylan, the music is a profound and transformative interpretation of one of America's most beloved and enigmatic folk blues standards, a song known sometimes as Gambler's Blues, and more famously as St. James' Infirmary Blues. To properly understand Dylan's masterpiece, we must first journey to that infirmary and meet the ghosts within its walls. In the long and storied history of American blues, few songs are as enigmatic, as pervasive, and as beloved as St. James' Infirmary Blues. It is a foundational text, a piece of musical DNA. Hundreds of artists have tried their hand at it over the past century, dating back to the earliest days of recorded sound. Louis Armstrong growled it as a gravel-throated sermon with his Savoy Ballroom. 5 in 1928. Coco the Clown sang it in Cab Calloway's voice in a surreal 1933 Betty Boop cartoon. Dave Van Ronk performed it with gruff tenderness in the smoky clubs of Greenwich Village at the height of the folk revival, and the White Stripes detonated it into raw punk blues fury at the turn of the millennium. It's been performed by everyone, from Oingo Boingo to Yo-Yo Ma to, believe it or not, Hugh Laurie. Despite this rich and varied history, the song's true origin remains shrouded in mystery, a puzzle for folklorists and music historians. Its recorded history begins in 1924, when its melody surfaced in a song called Charleston Cabin by the California Ramblers. 3 years later, Fess Williams and his Royal Flush Orchestra recorded the earliest full version of the song under the title Gambler's Blues. I passed by the infirmary and I saw my sweetheart there, and they had her stretched out on a table. Oh, a child so white, so pale, so fair. That recording uses lyrics and much of the arrangement from Time's The American Songbag Asterisk, a landmark 1,927 collection of folk tunes published by the poet Carl Sandburg. In his book, Sandburg presents 2 different versions of the lyrics. The first features a cinematic, nested narrative. The singer enters a bar and hears the tragic story from another patron. Well, it was down at Old Joe's barroom, at the corner by the square. They were serving drinks as usual, and the usual crowd was there. On my left stood Big Joe McKenney. His eyes were bloodshot red. He turned to the crowd around him. These were the words he said. This story begins as a classic lament for a lost love, but then jumps abruptly, almost schizophrenically, to an elaborate fantasy of the narrator's own funeral. 17 cold black horses hitched to a rubber-tired hack. 7 girls going to the graveyard, and 6 of them coming back. The second version is more straightforward, omitting the nested Old Joe's barroom opening. Both versions appear to trace their lineage back to a traditional 18th century English folk ballad called The Unfortunate Rake. That song, which dates to at least 1790 and is likely even older, tells the story of a singer who comes upon a soldier dying of syphilis outside London's St. James's Hospital. As I was walking down by St. James's Hospital, the dying soldier tells of the woman who gave him the disease and then, like his American counterpart, lays out a series of grandiose funeral arrangements. Gets 6 young soldiers to carry my coffin, 6 young girls to sing me a song, and each of them carry a bunch of green laurel ezel, so they don't smell me as they bear me along. In the centuries since it first echoed from the mouths of minstrels in the British Isles, the Unfortunate Rake has been a chameleon, reshaped to fit different times and cultural traditions. It's been adapted into a nautical song the young sailor cut down in his prime, a cowboy song, The Streets of Laredo, and, it was long assumed, a gambler's song. The folklorist Alan Lomax certainly drew a direct line between The Unfortunate Rake and St. James' Infirmary, and a 1960 compilation by Folkways Records explicitly traces this evolution. As recently as 2008, Bob Dylan himself repeated this origin story on his Sirius XM radio show. But while the lyrical parallels are striking, the lineage might not be so clear-cut. In his exhaustive book times, I went down to St. James' Infirmary, *, Robert W. Harwood dives deep into the song's history and finds no direct evidence tying it to The Unfortunate Rake. As Harwood points out, while there are thematic parallels in the lyrics, the two songs share no real musical lineage. In a later edition of his book, Harwood highlights a potential melodic connection not to an English folk song, but to a folk song performed by Roma people in the Nordics. It's plausible that this haunting, minor key melody was brought to America during a wave of Norwegian immigration in the late 19th century. Other evidence also casts doubt on the Unfortunate Rake connection. The earliest versions of the English ballad, which take place outside St. James's Hospital, would seem to be a surefire link, except that the earliest American versions of Gambler's Blues don't actually mention St. James. Some frame the song around Old Joe's barroom and the old infirmary, while others call it St. Joe's Infirmary. It's entirely possible that St. James was a later, more poetic addition to the song we now know. And that's just the beginning of the song's beautiful, confounding quirks. You can see them clearly in Louis Armstrong's iconic 1928 version, which strips the song down to 3 essential, almost contradictory verses. Taken together, they don't form much of a coherent narrative at all. The first is the iconic lament, the painful, unforgettable image of seeing a loved one dead in the hospital. I went down to St. James' Infirmary, saw my baby there. Then comes the middle verse, which seems to be about a romantic partner who has left the singer for another, not one who has died. She can look this wide world over, but she'll never find a sweet man like me. Finally, it concludes on that familiar verse about funeral arrangements, a flash of defiant, morbid bravado from beyond the grave. Put a $20 gold piece on my watch chain, so the boys will know that I died standing pat. Harwood traces that strange, out-of-place middle verse to Time's Harvard University songs *, a 1902 collection, It's quite possible this verse comes from a completely different song that was simply amalgamated into Santé, James' Infirmary over the years. And this is precisely how folk music works. It is an oral tradition, with tunes and stories passed from musician to musician, the songs themselves melding and changing in the process. A misheard lyric, a verse altered for a new audience, a melody borrowed from another source. The result is that some folk songs become nearly impossible to pin down. They aren't a single, static object, but an amorphous, collective idea. This is a process Bob Dylan understands in his bones. From the earliest days of his career, he participated in this tradition, consciously incorporating folk melodies and lyrical motifs into new pieces that spoke to his own moment in history. In doing so, he wasn't stealing. He was adding new chapters to the stories of celebrated folk songs. Dylan studied and deeply admired the blues singers of old, who had interpreted these ancient songs into their own canon, a canon that forms the very bedrock of American musical history. This ethos of lifting, reworking, and reimagining is summed up perfectly in a quote by a celebrated bluesman who eagerly and masterfully participated in the tradition. "I jump 'em from other writers, but I arrange 'em my own way." The man who said that was a singer and virtuoso 12-string guitarist who performed under various aliases over the years, but is best known to history as Blind Willie McTell. The life of Blind Willie McTell mirrors the archetypal narrative of so many bluesmen of his era. Born in Georgia around the turn of the century, he showed musical talent from a young age, starting on harmonica and accordion before taking up the guitar, an instrument both his parents played. His father, a drinker and gambler, left when he was young, and his mother died sometime in the 1920s. Left to fend for himself, McTell embraced the nomadic life of the wandering songster, a blind man navigating a hostile world with a guitar as his guide and shield. My daddy, he loved me reckless. My mammy, she loved me wild. He honed his craft on a notoriously difficult 12-string guitar, developing an astonishingly complex finger-picking style that allowed him to color his music with intricate, cascading flourishes. At first, he made his money playing carnivals, fish fries, and street corners. But in 1927, he kicked off his recording career by cutting 8 songs for Victor Records. These recordings were made at the tail end of a national blues craze that had fueled the young recording industry after the surprise success of Mamie Smith's Crazy Blues in 1920. Record executives scrambled to find and record as many blues singers as they could, introducing the raw magic of black blues to white audiences and birthing a handful of legitimate superstars, like the formidable empress of the blues, Bessie Smith. In 1926, Blind Lemon Jefferson scored a massive hit that had executives specifically seeking out blind bluesmen, commodifying their disability as a mark of authenticity. But the successes of Smith and Jefferson were the exception, not the rule. The vast majority of musicians recorded during this era were paid a pittance for their sessions, earned no royalties, and died in poverty and obscurity. Blind Willie McTell's career followed this latter, more tragic path. Though he recorded more than 120 songs over 3 decades for various labels, none sold particularly well, and he never lived to see the profound influence he would have on generations of musicians. He died of a stroke in 1959, just as a new wave of blues appreciation was stirring in the coffee houses of Greenwich Village. A wave that would carry a young Bob Dylan to national stardom. Dylan has sung McTell's praises over the years and recorded several of his songs, including a faithful rendition of Broke Down Engine Blues. Feel like a broke-down engine. It's tempting. Then, to see the song Blind Willie McTell as simply a heartfelt extension of Dylan's admiration for an underappreciated master. The chorus certainly seems to suggest as much, but things are seldom so simple with Bob Dylan. The rest of the lyrics have almost nothing to do with McTell himself, at least not on the surface. Even the lyric that times does times mention him seems a little strange, as McTell was most renowned for his virtuosic, almost supernatural guitar playing, not necessarily his singing. But the connections are there, woven deep beneath the surface. Several times throughout his career, McTell recorded a song called Dying Crapshooter's Blues. That song opens on the tale of little Jesse, a crooked gambler left by his love and shot by the police. Little Jesse was a gambler, night and day. He used crooked cards and dice. Sentimental guy, good-hearted, but had no soul. Hot and cold like ice. As he's ailing on his deathbed, he gathers his gang around him and, in a familiar trope, lays out his elaborate funeral wishes. 8 crapshooters to be my pallbearers. Let them be veiled down in black. I want 9 men going to the graveyard, but only 8 of them coming back. Dying Crapshooter's Blues ties Blind Willie McTell directly and indisputably back to St. James' Infirmary Blues, the very song that forms the melodic and emotional foundation for Bob Dylan's Blind Willie McTell. This is no coincidence. This is Dylan, the master weaver, pulling together a series of evocative images and archetypal figures to create a singular American epic. A song that tells the tragic and triumphant story of the blues, while exploring the ghosts of the land that birthed it. From its opening moments, Blind Willie McTell is laden with imagery from 2 separate but deeply intertwined cultural traditions, the Bible and the blues. In Dylan's lyrics, these 2 worlds overlay and interlace, framing the American South as a cursed holy land, a battleground for a divine struggle over the human soul. The song opens with an image that conjures the Passover and the 10 plagues of Egypt. Seen the arrow on the doorpost, saying, "This land is condemned," all the way from New Orleans to Jerusalem. It's not a direct biblical allusion, but a glancing blow, a poetic echo that conjures archetypal images of divine judgment, while also pointing to a more immediate and brutal American history. New Orleans here serves as the holy city of the blues, a fitting image, as it's where so much of American music first took root before spreading up the Mississippi River and across the world. It's also a city with direct musical ties to Dylan's song. While the exact birthplace of St. James' Infirmary Blues is unknown, New Orleans, with its rich tradition of jazz funeral marches, is one of the most likely culprits. And it's the hometown of Louis Armstrong, who recorded what is arguably the song's most definitive version. The importance of New Orleans in the history of blues and jazz is here compared to Jerusalem's place at the center of the Abrahamic religions. But there's another potential reading of Jerusalem. America is dotted with towns named Jerusalem, a reflection of a country founded by Christian pilgrims who imagined they could build their own New Jerusalem, their own city on a hill, One such Jerusalem, now called Cortland, Virginia, sits 250 miles south of the Mason-Dixon line. This Jerusalem was the setting for a pivotal, terrifying moment in American history: the bloody slave rebellion of Nat Turner in 1831. It's hard to say if Dylan intended this specific reference, but his lyrics are so saturated with the ghosts of slavery that it resonates with powerful, chilling force. Within this context, the condemned land is unequivocally the American South. In most live performances, Dylan tweaks this lyric, adding yet another layer of theological depth. All the way from New Orleans to Times, New Times, Jerusalem. In the Book of Revelation, New Jerusalem is the divine city gifted from the heavens, paradise made manifest on earth. It's crucial to remember that Dylan had converted to Christianity just a few years before writing this song, and was fresh off his gospel trilogy. Many view Dylan's Christian period as a strange mid-career blip, but it was the genuine expression of a man who truly believed, and he didn't simply abandon those beliefs when he returned to secular music. In 1983, he told the Los Angeles Times asterisk, "I don't particularly regret telling people how to get their souls saved." Blind Willie McTell feels like a profound, tormented exploration of a complex question. Can America's soul be saved? Or do the indelible scars of slavery mean the country is cursed to eternal damnation? Dylan himself is not the one making the declaration. In that first stanza, he is an observer, seeing times, someone else's times, judgment that the land is condemned. Throughout the song, he plays the part of the witness, a lonesome traveler passing through the South and bearing testimony to its beauty and its horror. I traveled through East Texas, where many martyrs fell. East Texas is another land with a bleak history. Its warm climate and fertile soil made it a perfect home for thousands of cotton plantations, which laid the groundwork for a system of institutionalized racism that would persist for generations. Even after the abolition of slavery, East Texas was the site of many horrific lynchings, and in 1910, the Slocum Massacre, which killed as many as 200 Black Americans. Dylan's image of martyrs falling once again pairs the history of American racial violence with the sacred language of religious sacrifice. And then, the song pivots sharply to the couplet that will anchor each verse. A moment of clarity in a landscape of ruin. And I know no one can sing the blues like Blind Willie McTell. With the scene set, Dylan hones in on the song's central metaphors in the second verse. We are met again with a dual vision, laden with meaning. Well, I heard that hoot owl singing as they were taking down the tent. The stars above the barren trees was his only audience. The image of tents being taken down calls to mind both the Israelites wandering the desert in the book of Exodus and the traveling vaudeville and minstrel shows that birthed the early blues industry. Giants like Mamie Smith, Ma Rainey, and Bessie Smith all cut their teeth on this circuit, which was a primary source of American musical entertainment before the record boom. And while it empowered some performers, the vaudeville industry was just as exploitative and predatory as the recording industry that would one day replace it. In the second half of the verse, Dylan contrasts McTell's authentic blues with these commercialized spectacles. Them charcoal-colored brother masqueraders can strut their feathers well, but nobody can sing the blues like Blind Willie McTell. Here, the refrain feels perfectly placed, a righteous declaration, It positions Blind Willie McTell in direct opposition to a commercial industry with deeply racist roots and a history of exploitation, specifically the grotesque tradition of minstrelsy, where white performers in blackface created racist caricatures of black life. McTell is personified in this verse as the hoot owl, a creature of the night, standing apart from the artifice of the tents, singing his soul to the heavens with no audience but the stars. It's a romanticized but powerful vision of a bluesman who sings not for fame or fortune, but because he is a vessel for the blues itself. In a religious context, the image of a blind Willie McTell evokes the ancient archetype of the blind mystic, the seer who possesses an inner sight. Dylan presents McTell as a prophet of the blues, less a man and more a symbol for the hundreds of bluesmen who forged a genre not out of a hunger for fame, but from a raw, beautiful, and unflinching expression of pain, a depth that few can ever truly understand. This romanticized hagiography, however, obscures a more complicated and deeply human truth, adding a potent layer of irony to Dylan's tribute. The real Blind Willie McTell was not some uncorrupted vessel of pure blues authenticity. He was a survivor, a pragmatist, a working musician navigating the brutal realities of his era. In the relentless pursuit of a living, he became a master of masks, often recording under a variety of noms de guerre so that rival labels could publish his work without conflict. He was a showman who spun tall tales about his songs, a bard who understood that the legend was as important as the lyric, and he even claimed authorship of pieces he didn't write. In one famous session, McTell prefaces his take on dying Crapshooter's blues with a poignant story, suggesting he wrote it about a man he personally knew named Jesse Williams. But as Robert W. Harwood meticulously documents in Times I Went Down to St. James Infirmary *, a version of the song can be traced back to an obscure pianist named Porter Granger, who had recorded it 2 full years before McTell ever laid claim to it. McTell wasn't just lying, he was exaggerating, leaning into a curated, imagined authenticity to burnish his own burgeoning legend. This kind of theater is the very bedrock upon which Dylan built his own career. He spent his early days in Greenwich Village weaving elaborate fictions about his past, including a fantastical claim that he'd grown up in a traveling circus. For Dylan, this self-mythologizing isn't a betrayal of the tradition. Times is times. The tradition a constructed authenticity that adds a crucial layer of intrigue to the artist's persona. It's the same myth-making that bluesman Tommy Johnson partook in when he claimed to have sold his soul to the devil at the crossroads. And it's a mythologizing actively perpetuated by the very people who documented the blues. John Lomax, the folklorist responsible for seminal field recordings, including a session with Blind Willie McTell himself, had his own habit of amplifying this imagined authenticity. He envisioned a primitive blues, perfectly preserved like a prehistoric insect in amber, and this bias tainted his invaluable work. This is most famously seen in the legend of Lomax dressing up Leadbelly in prison stripes for publicity photos. Despite the fact that Leadbelly was a sharp, proud man who favored fine suits, Lomax was a key figure in preserving the blues, but he did so by pandering to spectacle, presenting an idealized, rustic, and ultimately distorted version of the bluesman for the white gaze. This is a trend that certainly didn't stop with Lomax. Generations of white musicians have adopted fabricated personas or vocal affectations that gesture toward black cultural traditions, all in an effort to lend their music an air of unearned authenticity. Dylan himself is not innocent here. He is a Jewish man from the Iron Range of Minnesota who spent much of his early career meticulously imitating his own vision of an archetypal, wandering bluesman. Well, there's one kind of favor I'll ask of you. Blind Willie McTell finds Dylan finally acknowledging and interrogating this fraught aspect of his own artistic identity. But more than that, I think he's shedding the mask. He doesn't place himself within the scenes of suffering that birthed the blues. Instead, he positions himself as an outside observer, a spectral witness reminding America of its past sins and posing unanswerable questions for its future. The third verse is a sensory onslaught, dark and visceral, driving home the harshest realities of American history with cinematic clarity. Note Dylan's masterful use of sensory details, which breathe a haunting life into these scenes. See them big plantations burning. Hear the cracking of the whips. Smell that sweet magnolia blooming. See the ghost of slavery's ships. These lines plunge us not only into the foundational violence of slavery, but also its violent end in the Civil War. The sight of plantations burning is a clear reference to Sherman's March to the Sea, a scorched earth campaign that carved scars into the southern landscape that remain both physically and psychically real. But Dylan isn't penning an elegy for the Confederacy. The image of retribution is immediately followed by the most direct and brutal symbol of slavery's violence: the crack of the whip. Then, a moment of profound cognitive dissonance. The smell of magnolia blooming. The magnolia is the state flower of Mississippi and Louisiana, a symbol of delicate beauty that has become an indelible icon of the antebellum South. This image not only throws the preceding violence into sharp relief, but also forges a direct link to one of the most important and harrowing songs in American history. In 1939, Billie Holiday first recorded Strange Fruit, the searing anti-lynching protest song written by the Jewish schoolteacher Abel Mirabel. Southern trees bear a strange fruit. Strange Fruit uses the scent of magnolia in the exact same way Dylan does, juxtaposing its romantic, genteel connotations with the grotesque brutality of Southern racism. Scent of magnolia, sweet and fresh. Then, the sudden smell of burning flesh. By invoking Strange Fruit, Dylan situates himself within a specific lineage, that of the Jewish songwriter bearing witness to the Black American experience from the outside. And while Dylan obviously cannot speak intimately to that experience, he played his own part in the civil rights movement. His song, "Blowin' in the Wind," became an anthem that directly inspired Sam Cooke to write the transcendent, "A change is gonna come." And in August 1963, when Martin Luther King Jr. marched on Washington, a 22-year-old Bob Dylan was on that stage, performing for the masses. The defining image of this third verse, however, might be the ghost of slavery's ships, a specter of history that looms over the entirety of America and over the blues itself. The blues is a music that evolved times because times of slavery, a powerful alchemy of West African folk traditions, Caribbean rhythms, and European harmonic structures. It grew from the deep, primal human need for catharsis and joy, forged in the crucible of history's greatest injustices by a people who endured them. It blossomed in a post-war, Jim Crow's South racked with poverty, racism, and hardship. Musically, it's built on the DNA of field hollers and work songs, a legacy present not just in the blues, but in the myriad genres that grew out of it. Nearly all of American popular music is inextricably tied to this tradition, a reality not talked about enough because its origins are so complicated and painful. I view Blind Willie McTell as Dylan's attempt to reconcile the profound dissonance that occurs when such a powerful, life-affirming art form is born from such vivid, unimaginable cruelty. The song's Christian themes fold into these musings on salvation, redemption, and damnation. The spiritual imagery returns with force at the end of the verse. I can hear them tribes a-moaning. Hear the undertaker's bell. The moaning tribes could be the lost tribes of Israel, or the African tribes decimated by the slave trade, or yet another stain on America's soul, the genocide of its indigenous peoples. The parallel between American slaves and the enslaved tribes of Israel is a powerful one that has been drawn many times before, and it's one reason why the narrative of Christianity resonated so deeply with the Black diaspora and fueled so many movements of Black resistance. The verse concludes with the chilling finality of the undertaker's bell, a stark symbol of death that reminds us this entire song is structured as a funereal march. Interestingly, Dylan has taken to omitting this verse in more contemporary live performances, perhaps because its imagery is too raw and visceral, or perhaps because its absence restores some of the song's cryptic ambiguity. That ambiguity floods back in the penultimate verse, which leaves a vast space for interpretation. After hovering through broad, timeless scenes of history, Dylan pulls the focus inward to two enigmatic figures. There's a woman by the river with some fine, young, handsome man. He's dressed up like a squire, bootleg whiskey in his hand. I see this verse as a chilling exploration of white Southerners and their complicated role in this history. The man with the bootleg whiskey has a sinister edge, a tableau of genteel decay suggesting that no matter how finely the Old South might dress itself up, its violent, illicit history is always close at hand. Dylan then cuts abruptly from this couple to a chain gang, a brutal relic of the Jim Crow South that proves how racist institutions long outlived slavery itself. There's the chain gang on the highway. I can hear them rebels yell. The presumably black chain gang's cry is compared to the rebel yell, the defiant shout of the Confederate soldiers who fought to preserve their ability to oppress others. The comparison is jarring, fascinating, and deeply uncomfortable. Both the blues holler and the rebel yell are expressions of defiance. Dylan isn't justifying the lost cause. He's acknowledging the complex, human reality that these atrocities were not committed by abstract concepts of evil, but by real, living, breathing people. The current version of the lyric on his website makes this even clearer. Some of them died in battle. Some of them survived as well. As Blind Willie McTell reaches its climax, Dylan makes the divine stakes terrifyingly clear. Well, God is in his heaven, and we all want what's his. But power and greed and corruptible seed seem to be all that there is. This is a bleak, realist, almost Gnostic observation about the fallen nature of humanity. Humans will always find ways to hurt and oppress one another. Tempted by the corruptible seed of power, this struggle against temptation is at the very heart of the Christian theology Dylan evokes. It is a struggle. America has failed time and time again, which is why, as the song suggests, some say the land itself is condemned. But Dylan doesn't end on this note of utter despair. With a final, rousing vocal, he brings the lyrics back to the thematic anchor that has tied the entire epic together. I'm gazing out the window of the St. James Hotel, and I know no one can sing the blues like Blind Willie McTell. Blind Willie McTell, and the entire blues tradition he represents, becomes the hope for America's salvation, the hope that something beautiful and meaningful can be born from suffering that defies all reason. Dylan understands this power intimately. He is a man whose entire artistic identity was shaped by the blues, whose life was given meaning and direction by this music. His complex relationship to it is perfectly encapsulated in the metaphor of the St. James Hotel. I see the hotel as a stand-in for the blues tradition itself, a lyrical tie to the song's musical underpinnings. James' Infirmary is a patchwork quilt of a song, an expression of grief, a parable against sin, a dark memento mori, and a playful, life-affirming celebration. It embodies the profound contradictions of the blues, and so it forms the foundation of the building where Dylan sits, gazing out at the haunted landscape of America. For Dylan, this building is a hotel, which, by definition, makes him a tourist. He was not born of the blues. He doesn't possess the authenticity of the black blues singers, if such a tangible thing can even be said to exist. But he is a reverent patron of this hotel, and he pays for his stay by serving as its historian, bearing witness to its ghosts, and memorializing the greats who built it, even as he acknowledges he'll never truly be able to sing the blues like Blind Willie McTell. So, if Blind Willie McTell is such an undeniable masterpiece, why did it languish unreleased for 8 years? Only Dylan knows for sure. He's offered characteristically elusive answers over the years that he can't remember. That the recording wasn't quite right. That it was just an unfinished demo. It's hard to condone leaking music against an artist's wishes, but this might be one of the rare cases where the world is better off for the illicit actions of bootleggers. Blind Willie McTell is a singular, vital song, a towering achievement unlike anything else in Dylan's vast catalog, and Dylan himself seems to have eventually come around on it. After the band recorded a stellar cover in 1993, he began incorporating it into his live sets, performing it over 200 times and continuing to tweak its lyrics and arrangement, treating it like the living document it is. The word masterpiece is thrown around far too casually, especially with an artist like Dylan. But this song is as deserving of the title as any. It wasn't born from the youthful, arrogant defiance of his imperial heyday, but from a place of deep wisdom and reflection. It is a living testament to the richness and complexities of the American blues tradition, and an urgent, unflinching reminder of the history that forged it. Above all, it's a quintessentially human piece of work, examining the troubles that have followed us for as long as we've been around. Though steeped in religious language, it is not a sermon. When all is said and done, Dylan gives no clear answer as to whether the blues can truly redeem the sins of the past. He leaves that final, heavy judgment in the hands of his listeners, in our hands. To me, Bob Dylan is the most compelling and enigmatic figure in music history. The impulse to unpack the myths, contradictions, and nuances surrounding an artist like him is powerful. And clearly, I'm not the only one. He's drawn enough attention to inspire not one, but two different biopics exploring his story. Naturally, I have some thoughts on both of those films, which I'll be exploring in my next video. What's the point of music? Biopics beyond times I'm not there. Times and times a complete unknown asterisk. Legends like Dylan never truly tell their whole story. And perhaps those gaps are exactly what keep their music eternally alive. What do you think? Is Bob Dylan a reluctant prophet? A conduit for forgotten histories? Or is he just a brilliant trickster, forever playing with his audience? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to read your different perspectives on him. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss that deep dive into biopics I just mentioned. Thanks for sticking with Untold Music Legends. Keep listening, because every note holds a legend yet to be told.